two buds, same plant, same reservoir, same feed chart, same water, same everything, and one of them is a rock and the other one crushes in your hand like a cotton ball, if nutrition built density, that could not happen. Those two buds drank out of the same tank. So before you buy another bottle promising fat, dense flour, sit with that for a second because it quietly dismantles the entire premise you have been sold. Here is what that premise sounds like. Go read the label on any bloom booster on the shelf. 1314, 0, 34, 32. Enormous numbers on the phosphorus and the potassium, small numbers on everything else, and copy telling you it drives flour development and density. Some of them go further than that. I have read labels claiming the product strengthens sieve vessels, claiming it boosts sugar production, and the folk version on the forums is even cleaner than the marketing. Potassium moves energy around the plant, so more potassium moves more energy into your flowers, so your flowers get heavier. It sounds mechanical. It sounds like physiology. That is exactly why it has survived this long. And here's the part I did not expect when I started pulling the papers on this. The bottle is not wrong that potassium matters. It is not even a little bit wrong. Potassium is genuinely central to the machinery that moves sugar into a developing flower, more central than almost any grower realizes. The lie is not that potassium is involved. The lie is that you are short of it. If that distinction is interesting to you, the like button helps this reach the people still buying the bottle. So let me show you the actual machinery, because once you can see it, this whole argument resolves itself. Sugar made in the leaves does not drift to your flowers. It gets pushed there under pressure through a tissue called the phloem. Up in the leaf, the plant actively loads sucrose into the phloem tubes. That concentrated sugar lowers the water potential inside them. So water floods in from the water conducting tissue running right alongside. Water coming in raises the pressure. Down at the far end, inside your flower, sugar gets pulled out and burned. The concentration drops and the pressure drops with it. High pressure at one end, low pressure at the other, and bulk flow in between. That is the whole mechanism, and it is not a hand wave. Researchers have gone in and measured turgor pressure and tube conductivity along the transport path and found what the model predicts. Now watch where potassium sits inside that system. Potassium is the dominant positive ion in phloem sap, running somewhere around 50 to 150 millimolar. It balances charge inside the tubes. It contributes directly to the turgor that drives the flow. And potassium channels in the companion cells set the membrane voltage that powers the sucrose transporter, doing the loading in the first place. There is a very clean experiment on this. Researchers knocked out the main phloem potassium channel in a model plant, then sampled sap straight out of the tube. The mutant sap carried about half the sucrose of the normal plant, half. So potassium is not adjacent to sugar transport, potassium is part of the pump. And this is where I have to head off the second half of this myth before it starts, because there is a smarter sounding version going around that is more wrong, not less. It goes like this: drive your vapor pressure deficit hard, push transpiration, and you will move more sugar into your flowers. Sap flow equals sugar flow. It does not. Those are two different tissues moving in two different directions. The water conducting tissue carries water and dissolved minerals upward, and that upward pull is transpiration. The phloem carries sugar from the leaves down toward the sinks, and it is a separate, pressurized, actively loaded system. They are hydraulically coupled. The phloem pulls its water out of the water conducting tissue right next to it, which means when you drive transpiration hard, you pull that water potential more negative, and it becomes harder, not easier, for water to enter the phloem. Turgor falls. Flow slows. Under real water stress, the plant compensates by loading sugar more concentrated. The sap gets more viscous, and measured transport velocity goes down, not up. So no, you cannot push carbohydrates with a dehumidifier. And by the way, every sap flow sensor you have ever seen advertised is reading the upward water stream. It is measuring transpiration. It was never reading your sugar highway. Okay, so potassium runs the pump. Why does more potassium not run it harder? Because a pump is not a bucket. Every transporter, every channel, every enzyme in that pathway is a protein with a finite number of binding sites. And once those sites are occupied at working concentration, adding more substrate changes nothing. The plant is not rate limited by potassium availability once potassium is sufficient. It is rate limited by how much sugar the leaves actually made, and by how hard the flower is pulling. The published sufficiency range for this plant in flower runs roughly 60 to 175 parts per million potassium in solution. In tissue, flowering leaf potassium sits somewhere around 1.5 to 3% of dry weight. 15 parts per million produces visible chlorosis and real yield loss. That is a true deficiency, and it is absolutely worth fixing. 240 is where damage starts showing up. Most of you are not sitting at 15. Most of you are running a full strength commercial line and then adding a booster on top of it, which means you cleared sufficiency before you ever opened the second bottle. And that is exactly what the controlled work finds. One trial ran 5 potassium levels across that range and reported that most cannabinoids and terpenoids were highest at the lowest deficient concentrations and declined as potassium supply climbed. Their recommendation landed on 60 parts per million. A separate response surface study out of Canada tested potassium from 60 all the way up to 340 parts per million and found no effect on inflorescence yield anywhere across that range. And on the phosphorus side, the crop physiology lab at Utah State reported that raising root zone phosphorus significantly increased phosphorus in the leachate and did not improve yield or quality. Read that sentence again. It went into the drain, it did not go into your flower. 5 or 6 independent groups now, all reporting negligible effect of increased nutrient supply on yield and quality. This is not a fringe position. It is the consensus, and it has been for a few years. Quick thing before the second half, because what is coming is the part that actually moves your yield. If these breakdowns are useful to you, channel membership is 99 cents a month. You get videos early before they go public, and you get the members only emojis in the comment section, which is honestly worth it just for the arguments we have down there. Link is under the video. Okay, back to it. So the best case for overfeeding potassium is that you waste money. There is a worse case, and the label never mentions it. Potassium, calcium, and magnesium compete for uptake at the root. They are all positively charged, and they run through overlapping transport pathways, so in excess of one crowds out the others. And the asymmetry matters here. Potassium suppressing magnesium is a stronger effect than magnesium suppressing potassium. There is trial data on this plant specifically showing that high potassium supply lowered both calcium and magnesium concentration in leaf tissue. So picture how that actually plays out in your room. You add the booster. 2 weeks later, intervenal yellowing shows up through the middle canopy. And what do you conclude? Magnesium deficiency. So you add magnesium, but you never had a magnesium supply problem. You had a potassium excess problem, and you have now stacked a second correction on top of the first one. Second cost, and this one lets me kill a term everybody uses wrong. Growers talk about salt lock, like minerals pile up inside the plant tissue and jam the plumbing shut. That is not a thing. There is no recognized mechanism where mineral buildup inside tissue physically halts water movement. What is real happens outside the plant at the root zone. Every dissolved salt lowers the water potential of your solution. Push electrical conductivity high enough and the water outside the root is held more tightly than the root can pull, so uptake slows down. The Utah State group ran 2 cultivars at 4 versus 8 millisiemens per centimeter. At 8, height dropped around 15%, and flower yield dropped around 20% in some cultivars. That is a real measurable cost. And notice what it is not. It is not a lock. It is not a clog. It is osmotics at the root, and the fix is dilution, not another product. So if it is not the bottle, what actually builds a dense flower? Light. It is light, and it is not close. There is a study I keep coming back to on this. Single genotype ambient carbon dioxide light intensity varied from 120 micromoles per square meter per second all the way up to 1800. Dry inflorescence yield increase linearly across that entire range. But the number I care about is the other one they measured. Apical inflorescence density also increased linearly from 120 to 1800, not yield. Density, the exact property the booster is selling you, responding directly and proportionally to photons. And here is the detail that tells you what is really happening. Leaf level carbon assimilation saturated well below 1800. Individual leaves stopped responding, and the flowers kept packing tighter anyway because whole canopy light capture kept climbing. Which takes us straight back to those two buds. Same plant, same reservoir, same potassium, same phosphorus, same everything on the label. The difference between the rock at the top and the cotton ball at the bottom is that the top one lived in a few hundred more micromoles of light. That is the entire explanation. Your lower canopy is not underfed. It is underlit. And if you are running ambient carbon dioxide, you are practically capped around 900 to 1,000 at the canopy before other stresses start showing, which means the lever you actually have is not intensity at the top, it is penetration and distribution, defoliation, training, spacing, fixture height, side lighting, getting photons into the parts of the plant that are currently producing your larvae. Second real lever, and this one destroys density fast. Temperature. Hold your canopy sustained above about 28 degrees Celsius, roughly 82 Fahrenheit, through flower, and you get foxtailing. Loose, spindly, stacked calyx towers with air between them. The plant keeps throwing new growth instead of packing what it already has. And I want to be very clear about the order of operations here, because this is where whole harvests get lost. If your canopy is running hot, no feeding change saves the density. None. You can dial potassium to the milligram and you will still pull Airy flower off a hot 10. Temperature sits upstream of everything nutritional. Third one is the one nobody wants to hear. Some genetics are just airy. Long flowering equatorial lines in particular produce loose structure as a cultivar trait, not as a symptom. That is what that plant does. It is not a deficiency, it is not your environment, and there is no input that converts it. If you have run the same cut 3 times in a dialed room and it came out loose 3 times, you have your answer, and the answer lives at the seed bank. And on that, if there is a specific cultivar or a specific claim you want put through this treatment, drop it in the comments. Half of what I cover comes out of that section. Now, silica, because I know it is coming, silicon is real. Plants take it up and deposit it in cell walls as amorphous silica, and it forms genuine cross-links with the structural polymers in there. Stronger stems, better resistance to pests and pathogens. That is well documented across a lot of species. What is not documented is the flower density claim. The most cited number on the forums, a 28% jump in bud dry weight, traces back to a trade magazine write-up, industry funded with no statistics attached to it. The best peer-reviewed trial I could find did show roughly a 20% yield increase, but the significance was marginal and the silicate was applied alongside another product, so the two cannot be separated. And when researchers actually mapped where silicon ends up in the flower, it silicified the covering trichomes, the structural hairs, and not the glandular ones. So run silica if you want sturdier stems. That is a real benefit. It is not a density product. The reason this myth is so durable is not that growers are gullible. It is that four completely different problems produce one identical symptom. Airy flower can come from insufficient light at that spot on the plant. It can come from excess canopy temperature. It can come from cultivar genetics. Or rarely, it can come from a real nutrient deficiency. Four causes, one symptom, and the standard reflex, reach for the bloom booster, addresses only the fourth one, which, if you are running any complete commercial feed line, is almost certainly not the one you have. That is the trap. The symptom is real, the frustration is real, and the product is aimed at the least likely cause on the list. So here is the order I would actually work in. Measure your light at the canopy, and then measure it again down at the depth where the loose flower is forming, and fix the distribution before you touch anything else. Get canopy temperature under 28 degrees Celsius and hold it there. Feed a complete line at label strength and stop, because sufficiency is a plateau, not a slope, and past it, you are buying magnesium antagonism and osmotic stress. And if you have done all three and that cut still comes out loose, run a different cut, because those two buds were never an argument about nutrition. They were an argument about photons, and the plant was making it the entire time. You just have to be willing to read it. Peace.